So today
Okay.
we are going to speak about autism, what goes with it, how to fight against it, how to survive with it, and how spiritual warfare pans out with autism. Tabitha, could you please introduce yourself and what do you do for business?
My name is Tabitha Wilson, and I am the author of No Cross, No Crown, A Journey Through Autism, Bullying, and Spiritual Warfare. I'm also an autism mom who just so happens to be a registered dietitian and physician assistant. And currently, I'm working as a full-time author, working towards all of my books and pretty much just doing author work.
That is awesome. So my first question, Tabitha, here, could you explain a little more about your experience as an autism mother?
Oh gosh, my experience as an autism mom has been definitely an experience. It's been challenging in the sense that no one expects to have a child with autism. So pretty much, the experience alone, just getting the diagnosis in the very beginning, it was scary, even being a healthcare professional, because I didn't know what to do. No one really knows what to do with autism initially. So I had done some research on it for the most part and found that early intervention was key. So I, of course, jumped in and tried to get my child, all the educational things that he needed and the resources and everything that would help him to optimize his level of education. But the biggest part about autism and managing it, I would have to say, was dealing with the behavioral challenges that I didn't anticipate. But autism, again, it's really a puzzle because there's no two children that have autism that are alike. So there's no criteria that will tell you, okay, well, this child has autism and this child doesn't until really the age of 6. So at the age of 6, that's when I found out that, he was definitely diagnosed with autism, because prior to age 6, those symptoms of autism, signs and symptoms, they can actually kind of resolve. So at age 6, he still pretty much had those symptoms that went along with autism, the signs rather, and that's when he was diagnosed.
So my question here, was it an easy or a difficult feeling to know that one of your family has autism?
It was difficult. It was very difficult because, I mean, it was more difficult because it was my son. And, no one anticipates autism for their child. And everyone wants their child to grow up and go to college and have a normal life. And I had a lot of fear about the diagnosis because I didn't know if my child would be able to do any of those things.
So my question here, it is very interesting. Why did you decide to do the research about autism?
Initially,
Yeah.
well, initially I did research on autism because when I was in PA school as a physician assistant, I had a student that was autistic. And not a student, I'm sorry, a patient that was autistic. And I had to read about that patient. But of course, I never anticipated I was going to have a child with autism. So I did the research a long time ago for the patient that I was working with. But it just so happened that when I had a child with autism, I, of course, researched even more and got more into detail about it, because back then, autism was a lot different, the way they diagnosed it and whatnot. But as time progressed, there was a lot more studies and a lot more things that you can do about it. And even now today, there's a lot more that can be done to help to make autism and the signs of autism symptoms a lot better.
What are the main things you have learned through your researches and studies about autism?
Well, I mean, autism, I know that none of the children with autism are alike. That's why it's the pieces of the puzzle. Okay. So, children who have autism, pretty much, some have socialization issues, some are nonverbal, some are verbal, some have to have structured routines. Some children have behaviors that are repetitious, like flapping and jumping and rocking and things of that nature, because they have sensory issues. There are just a lot of different characteristics of these children. So in my research, I found that, some children even have allergies to certain things or sensitivities. And I found that even with my own child, he had a sensitivity to gluten, and he wasn't speaking or talking or saying any words up until the age of 7. but he started actually talking when I took the gluten out of his diet. And when I took him to get allergy testing done, he had a lot of sensitivities. I mean, there were so many things that he was like not allergic to, because the numbers weren't high enough to say, okay, you're allergic, but it was high enough to say, okay, well, you're really sensitive. And he was sensitive to just about everything. But, with all of those sensitivities, I have a strong feeling that, that caused a lot of the symptoms that he was having, like the agitation and the behavioral things and all of that.
So, could you take us on a journey? Like, how was it bringing up your son through autism?
Yeah, it was a challenge. I mean, he was diagnosed pretty much at age 2, but again, that wasn't an official diagnosis until he was 6. So, growing up, as we went through the journey, I found that, being a dietitian was very like invaluable, because, I knew a lot of things about nutrition and how to do like the food elimination diet and things of that nature. So I noticed that he was having some significant behavior problems. And that is when I did the food elimination diet, and I noticed that he had like certain reactions to certain foods. Like if he ate bananas or red grapes, oh my gosh, he would like go break the window or something. That's how aggressive he would become. So as time went by, he was still having a lot of behavior, even though I took those foods out of his diet. So I started with doing biomedical intervention with a DAN doctor, and DAN stands for Defeat Autism Now. And pretty much those are people who believe in natural ways of treating autism. So we did a bunch of vitamin drops, minerals, probiotics, supplements, all of these different things. But we were doing so many different things at one time. I really wasn't sure what was working, but I noticed that he did have a little bit of improvement, but there was no vast improvement. Like, oh my God, he's so much better. So, it's really hard to say if it really worked or not. So I can't say I had a positive outcome from that. But then as the journey went down a little bit further, the behaviors became way more significant. I ended up relocating from Texas to the US. I mean, not to the US, to the East Coast, because I couldn't find a school out there that could really accommodate him, and the educational resources were really important. Now, I do want to mention that I started him with early childhood intervention. And early childhood intervention is key, because that is the point when, like, before the age of 3, if he meets the criteria, then he would be able to actually start school, public school, at the age of 3. Okay, where other kids start at 5, he would get a jump start. So, during that journey, he went through early childhood intervention. They started early speech therapy. They started occupational therapy, a lot of different things. He was getting this really intense therapy. And then he went to school at age 3, and he was really doing well. So by the time he was 5 and he was actually in kindergarten, he was on point. The only thing was he still wasn't talking, and he wasn't, getting, the behavior wasn't getting any better. So that was the biggest challenge. So I even put him in preschool, because I thought that maybe it was about him not being around any other kids, because he didn't have any siblings or anything. So I said, well, maybe he just needs to be around other kids so he could, kind of hear other kids talking. And that wasn't it either, because he still wasn't, talking, and he was still very behavioral. So as he got a little bit older, the main issue was autism and behavior challenges. And that was really the bulk of it. And it just progressively worsened. So that was really the journey that I went through. And I'm still kind of challenged with that.
And where did spiritual warfare start to engage in the journey?
Well, spiritual warfare is just one of those things when you are a believer, and when you just so happen to think you're getting ahead, something always pulls you back. It seemed like, I would call it, the enemy was just pulling me down. And every time I tried to do something to help my children, something else would pile on top of that, then something else, then something else. And then my daughter started getting bullied at school. And then it was just always something, So I couldn't seem to get ahead. And then also another component of the spiritual warfare, they say that, with spiritual warfare, then you can actually work through your children, through your marriage, through any way possible to get to you. And I feel like strongly that's what was really happening, because, the behavior was just worse than any behavior I had ever seen. And it was to a point where, there was like changes in my children's voice. It was scary. It was really scary. And I didn't know how to manage that. The only thing I could do was to pray and pray and pray. And, my prayers weren't being manifested. So I was like, God, are you hearing me? What's going on? Why is this happening? And, it just seemed like it just kept going on. And it was both of the kids. It was both of them. So I go more in detail in the book about exactly what was happening during these episodes of spiritual warfare. But it was pretty intense. It was very intense.
So tell us, why did you decide to write the book, and what happened during the time of writing the book?
Well, I decided to write this book to help people. And the reason is because my journey was so profound and so crazy that other people had to know about this. I had to tell people because, there are a lot of people in the world who have children with autism, kids that are going through bullying and whatnot. So this is a global problem. This is not, just in Maryland or DC or Virginia or wherever. This is all over the world. And the problem here is that, a lot of parents don't know what to do in certain situations. And because I went through this journey to the most intense effect, it's like I really learned a lot. And I want to share that with other parents around the world. And another reason I wrote this book was because with what my children went through, no child should ever have to go through. I mean, no child should ever have to go through what they went through. And the reason is because, the autism, okay, yes, autism is autism. But the things that were happening in the school system, in the administrative realm, in the hospital setting, with social workers, people who are supposed to be the go-to people to help kids like this, they were like not on board with my child. And it was a battle with the school system, a battle with the hospital, a battle with everyone involved. And, no one should have to go through that. Even with my daughter, a lot of schools have this no bullying policy, but yet the reality is, why are they bullying her? And why aren't you doing anything about it? And it's affecting her to a point where it's almost irreversible, causing depression and a lot of things. So, people in the world need to know what goes on behind closed doors. If they have a child with autism, they really need to stay on top of it because they do have other options. And I didn't know I had other options until I got into this journey.
That is awesome to know. So what are your main recommendations for, let's say, parents and guardians for children with autism?
Stay on top of your children. Stay on top of their education. Stay on top of everything that's going on with them. IEP meetings, read the documentation after the IEP meeting, because sometimes the things that they say, what it's not, even if it's said in the IEP meeting, if it's not documented, then it doesn't mean anything at all. So you have to read that stuff, because sometimes the school system has a way of altering the language or making things sound like they're doing everything they can for the child when they're really not, So you have to really read it and make sure that you approve it before you sign off on it. Because once you sign off, it's like saying, okay, I agree. But my main recommendation is to really just be on top of your children, go visit them in the school setting, go just watch them from the window while they're in the middle of a classroom to see how they're performing. Make sure they're in the right classroom. Make sure they're not putting them in another classroom where they're not supposed to be. Make sure that if you can afford or get a behavioral, or not a behavioral, but an educational consultant to go into these IEP meetings with you, get someone to go with you who knows the IEP language, because that was one of the downfalls with me initially, because I didn't really know what I was doing. And there's so many loopholes and ins and outs that if you really don't know what you're doing, you can kind of set yourself up. So definitely stay on top of your child and get someone who's knowledgeable in there to make sure that your child is getting the education that they need, that their IEP goals are being met, and that you're not being glazed over as a parent.
What do you have to say about bullying?
Well, bullying is just awful. I mean, I'm a victim of bullying myself in middle school, actually just throughout in general. But bullying is not just a school thing. I mean, people get bullied in the workplace, you know? It's all over. But for this particular book, it was about my daughter who started getting bullied in 5th grade, and it just went spiraled out of control to a point where it decreased her confidence and her self-esteem. And she ended up, you know, just she ended up to a point where she had to be hospitalized because of it. So it was really significant. It was really deep. And it took me a while to get her back on track so that she would be able to be functional again in an environment with, you know, kids that were around her, because she had to transfer schools just to get away from these bullies. Then when she got to the other school, there were more bullies. So they're like everywhere you go. But once your confidence and self-esteem go down or plummet to a certain level, you know, you really kind of just don't feel good about yourself. So bullying is definitely something I really feel like it needs to be taken more seriously, especially in the school system. I found that the biggest problem with bullying is that the administrative staff do not want to follow the protocol. You know, they don't want to follow the bullying protocol. You know, if you have a child who's bullied someone, you need to notify that child's parents. They need to know about it. You know, you can't just ignore it and make one child feel one way and the other person feel like they got away with it, because that's not going to help. It's going to make it worse in the end. And that's what happened with her.
It has been so important and so courageous to talk about that and get into your experience and your knowledge, and especially your professional knowledge about autism and your great recommendations for parents and other guardians. Thank you so much for that indeed, Tabitha.
You're so welcome. Thank you, Nour.